Hi everyone and welcome to day 11, day 10, day 12? I don't even know anymore. But what's important is today is my top fiction books of 2022. This list is going to be 11 books. I know I should make it 10, but my nonfiction book list was short, so I figured why not make this one a little bit longer. And I think it'll become apparent why I want to in a second. But this is just every book that I loved that was fiction. I'm hoping you might find some you like, some that are new to you. And at the end of the day, I hope you pick some of them up and give them a try. For now, let's talk about why I love them. First up, we have Square Cubed by Shauna McGuire, aka Mira Grant. All the way around, I suppose. This is a horror novella book that is written in a limited edition by Subterranean Press. This is one of her Mira Grant horror books that sort of gets a limited release and then gets released on audio. I actually read this in March. It was released in December 2021. I made myself read it physically, even though, if you don't know me, I read mostly by audio because I just don't have the time usually to sit down and read. But I made the time for this one. This is the story of two sisters who are young, they're out playing, then a storm comes and something weird happens. A giant rift in space and time, in the nature of reality, just opens up. And they're separated. And these monsters come out of that rift and the world is forever changed, both by the presence of them, the destruction they cause, but also by the physics that seem to be altered by their presence. And without getting into where the story actually goes, I absolutely adored this. As a horror book, it's not her most terrifying or even unsettling, but what it was, I felt like, was a really fun, dark, monstrous horror setting. She creates this dark scientific world that I absolutely adored. I mean, if you saw my nonfiction list, my nose is disappointed. I talk about how I love cosmology there. And this really I think it really piqued my interest because of how it really pulls in on that level of cosmology by fucking with the laws of the nature. And it was that sort of manipulation of nature, of reality, that I just love contemplating. I think she does enough, that is to say Shauna McGuire, to make me invested in this world, no matter how nonsensical it becomes with this new warping going on. I haven't even gotten to the real plot. I mean, the story follows the two sisters, or one sister specifically, who grows up to investigate as a scientist what the fuck's happening with this rift. She's of course motivated by being separated from her sister. The story then evolves as she understands what's going on, and how the world reacts really is where the plot comes in at play. I loved this. I reread it when the Audible audio came out in December, that is to say this month, honestly a week or so ago. I reread it. That's how much I loved it. And while it may not surpass the top 10 on this list, I had to mention it. Maybe you could call it an honorable mention on this list because I wanted people to hear that. I haven't heard anybody talk about it. Now that we know it's on audio, maybe people might be more likely to pick it up because it will be more accessible than, of course, getting yourselves on a $40 limited edition by Subterranean Press. Next up, my number 10, My Heart is a Chainsaw, number 1 in the Lake Witch trilogy by Stephen Graham Jones. This is the first 4.5 to 5 star probably I've given Stephen Graham Jones ever. And I think part of that was twofold. I mean, this book is like his other books. It's a love story to horror and to slashers. But it was finally at a point where for some reason, I finally managed to feel like I was fully immersed in a way that I haven't in the past. Usually it's a matter of style that doesn't quite click with me, even though that style is often what pulls me back and to read him because of its uniqueness. And I love that unique take on the horror. But this one had all of that, all that uniqueness and that love, that pure love of the genre that I can tell Graham has, combined with my ability to get fully immersed. And that just made this book really work. What is this? This is the story of a teenage girl, I believe, in this town where she's convinced a slasher has come to occur. She tries to convince people they don't want to believe her because she's a little too invested in her horror love. Her being convinced that everything is a sign. We also have to deal with the fact that there seems to be someone hinted at trauma in her life. And some people seem to be suggesting that maybe her clinging to horror is a way for her to reckon with her own trauma. This story sort of then plays out from there. Is it a slasher? Is it not? Is it just her mental health? I really like the direction it went. I love a good horror book that explores mental health and how that intersects with some horror tropes. I think what I love about mental health is that it's a way of exploring more abstract types of horror in a way that makes it more real, or certain things don't exist in the real world. the exploration of mental health as a way of helping us appreciate how things that we consider to be speculative can very easily become real for some people under certain stresses. I love that kind of conversation. This isn't exactly what's going on here, but still I like that it's a conversation that's going on at all. Next up was a book that I don't know if I expected it to be on here, but when I was reviewing my top book, all my books, this was one I felt like it just had to be here. That is Selling to Bicentennium. This is a novella by Robert Silverberg. It is a 1985 release, and I read this for my Westworld reading vlog. At its core, it is honestly, I feel like it's Westworld before Westworld was Westworld. Westworld being, of course, Jurassic Park, but with robots. But it's the Russian doll of origin stories here. This is about this man who awakens in this future where he's not from. Like, he's from our time, and he's in this world that is very futuristic, and he doesn't understand what's going on, and he starts to visit these different worlds, each of which are an imagining or reimagining of some important times in history. I believe Bicentennium is one of the worlds, one of the amusement parks almost that these people visit to. But without ruining the surprises that are going on here, I really, really loved what this did. I feel like it was probably my favorite book in that Westworld vlog. I think it's the truest book that I could say, if you like Westworld, you should read this. This is the closest I can say to that. And it definitely isn't confusing. It's not like Westworld because it's confusing. It's like Westworld because the basic premise is very similar, and I recommend checking it out. It also alludes to time travel. I love time travel. So if you like time travel too, you might find this one intriguing. Next up is a book that gets so much controversy. It's even on some people's worst of the year, and that is You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty. I wasn't sure if I wanted to put this on here, but if I'm being honest, I did love this book. 4.5 out of 5 stars, I think, was my rating for this. And for those who don't know, this is the story of this young black woman who is trying to get back into dating, and she finds herself visiting her new boyfriend's boyfriend, or maybe not boyfriend. It's complicated. That's part of the mess. It's a very messy story, and he basically ends up at his home and visiting his family and getting to meet this famous chef that is this guy's dad. What plays out is something that is unconventional, but definitely not unreal. It's just extremely uncomfortable. And while I don't necessarily love the final execution of everything that went down, I do really enjoy exploring this messiness and trying to think about the processes that go through people's minds when they make certain decisions. And to me, this is almost like an empathizing type book where you try to empathize with the people making these decisions who you vehemently disagree with, obviously, on the choices they're making. But still, to dissect that, to me, was what really intrigued me here. And it's why it ultimately made its way here to my top list, my top 10 list, top 11 list, top 10, whatever you want to call it. And funnily enough, my next top book this year, I read 2 of their books. Freshwater, also by Kwiki Emezi. And this one was definitely better. This really, I think, touches back on the conversation I had about mental health with Stephen Graham Jones. And this is a perfect example of how I think mental health is the perfect opportunity to explore speculative fiction in a way that is possible in our world. This is about a young girl who grows up with a goddess inside of her. I believe we're getting the perspective of the goddess, of the story being told from that perspective. But at the same time, we have to reckon with the fact that, is this real, or is this just a manifestation of some type of mental disorder, perhaps schizophrenia? And either way, I thought it was fascinating how it explored some spiritual ideas while simultaneously, I think, touching on mental health issues. While I'm realizing now it's been a while since I read this, and it may be one I want to reread, but I really adored this book, what it did and how it did it. For the reasons, like I said, I've already touched on, this book was phenomenal, and I strongly recommend it. I think it gets a lot of attention, and for good reason. I'll also say if somehow She Made a Fool of Death with Her Beauty was your first Kwiki Emezi book, you should definitely give them another try. All the books aren't like that, and you'd be missing a great deal if you stop there, I promise you. Next up, Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. First off, I made a review for this. It's probably one of my most popular videos of the year. I don't know why it popped off so well, but I really loved this book. This is a time travel book. We now have 2 books that are effectively time travel. And I love this because I think time travel is the perfect environment for Emily St. John to do her type of writing. I mean, she loves to do these epic tales that are spanning huge swaths of time with interlacing characters throughout the generations. And when we talk about time travel, that slow reveal of how everything interconnects, it brought me a huge level of satisfaction in a way that I really loved. I picked this up because I got it granted by Nick Alley. It's one of those requests that I did because they're popular and I knew I shouldn't have. I've always had mixed feelings about their work up to now, but it's one of those situations where like, thank God I did, because Jesus, this book was amazing. I gave this 5 stars and I absolutely adored it, and my love hasn't really left. It's one of those books that I think I probably could reread just for fun because it was just that good. And I'm really glad I found that book, and I found a book by St. John Mandel that this worked really well for me. I'm just so happy right now. Sorry talking about this. I haven't thought about it in a while, and it brings me joy. Next up, Another Country by James Baldwin. And it's impossible, I feel like, to read a James Baldwin and not end up with him on my top 10 list of the year. This is one, though, I thought I might DNF at first because it felt like a lot. It's following this friend group with these complicated character interactions, and it's jumping between points in time in a way that I found very disconcerting. In fact, we don't introduce to the friend group at large. We get introduced to them individually, and it's only through time do we begin to see how their lives intersect. And I'm so fucking glad I did not give up just because I was confused about why we're jumping between different people that seem to be are seemingly disconnected, because they're all fundamentally connected. And it's a social conversation about race and queerness in a way that I feel like only James Baldwin is capable of doing. And I'm just so glad I read this book, and I'm so glad I didn't give up, because it's one of those books that it's difficult at first, but it really, really pays off. It's one of those books that, because it's so difficult, it's all the more enjoyable in the end. I say enjoyable. It's not necessarily a happy book. It's a very satisfying book. And that's why it is here in my top, top 5 books, fiction books of the year. I'm really excited to return to James Baldwin. I feel like I've gone too long already without reading more of his books. I am a little sad because I'm pretty sure I've read all of his queer works, and I would love to see more queer works from him, but I don't think that's going to happen. So I suppose I'll just have to revisit his queer works if I want more of that. Okay, next up is one that I definitely didn't expect to be on my top 10 list, but I think I had to. This is The Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker. And in some ways, I'm including this partly because for the same reasons I included Squared Cubed. This isn't the best work of fiction ever written. It's not my favorite in the same way that Akwaeke Emezi's books are or James Baldwin's books are. It's just good because I love myself some demonic horror. And this, it went full throttle, and I adored it. I did not expect to love it because I always saw Hellraiser the movie as sort of a subpar film that was just really fun in the ideas it explored. I thought it was a fun film, but I didn't think it was that special. Then we get into the book, and I felt like it brought a level of realism to this absurd world that I had thought had been hitherto non-existent. And that's really what made me love this book. I gave it 5 stars, and I feel like I couldn't put it lower on this list if I felt so confident it's a 5-star book, and I do. Again, it's for different reasons, but who the fuck cares? It's my list, right? So I loved this book. I loved the dark, gory horror, and I'm here for it. This is the kind of horror I love. It isn't always, I do love insightful horror too, reflective horror, but this is one that was just fun, and I adored it so much. Okay, keeping on with the horror shtick, we have The Devourers by Andrew Doss. This book was another surprise. I think I had postponed this book for so long. It was on the 10 books or some recommendations lists by horror authors who are translated or less well known. And I believe I got that list from Erica for the Broken Spine. I remember we read the Frankenstein book, and on top of that list was this one and the Tender is the Flesh book, which, not to spoil what's coming up, but I read both of these books this year, and last year was when I read the Frankenstein retelling in Baghdad, and that one was so disappointing. And it's sad to think that I started with that one, but on the bright side, when I finally did get to this one and eventually Tender is the Flesh, I fucking loved them. This book, oh my god, where do I start? Okay, it's queer, and it is monstrous. It's beautifully written. The writing is as beautiful as the cover itself. Interlace the queerness and just the monstrous horror And I was so fucking here for it. This is effectively like an Anne Rice retelling, but with werewolves. And on top of that, the werewolves are sort of grounded in somewhere in India, I believe. And so we're getting some culture interlaced here with this werewolf story in a way that I think adds more to the story than we have from a traditional Anne Rice book. And that's why I think this book just resonated so strongly with me. We have this queerness. We have, honestly, I think it challenges gender norms in some ways, and I really adored it for that. And it was just the slow building of the queer relationship between a werewolf and basically the reporter, or in this case, the academic, who they're telling the story to. That left me, just begging for more. It was amazing, it was beautiful, and it was really sexy, to be honest. I really hope my parents aren't watching this. Honestly, this is a book I want to revisit, and I would love to do a discussion of this book with someone because it is just really, really good. And the best horror of the year, like this, please read this book. I think it's really well done. There was, I think there's one critique that I didn't think about, which was from an author that I like. They talk about how there was a woman character that has to endure a certain level of violence, and it's a key part of the evolution of our character's history. And I think it's a fair criticism to question whether or not it was necessary to have a character's, progression hinge on the suffering of a woman. And I think that was a fair critique. At the end, I still love this book, and I think it's really worth reading, but I can recognize that criticism is there, and it's something to be aware of going into it. Okay, so speaking of Tender as the Flesh, Tender as the Flesh, I feel wrong putting this above The Devourers because honestly, as a favorite book, I would say The Devourers is probably higher than the Tender as the Flesh. I just feel like Tender as the Flesh probably had a deeper punch to the gut than The Devourers did. It was more unnerving, more disturbing. And I don't know, I want to have a full review of this. I don't want to get too deep into it. But basically, we have a world where cannibalism has become mainstream. And it's fascinating because at first I thought the author was trying to have a conversation about veganism and the abuse of animals and how we justify it. But then I realized, with a little bit of back and forth with the chat AI that I talked about in my previous video, that this is probably more of a capitalism discussion. I mean, let's think about this world where if we were to treat humans as if they were cattle to be raised for the slaughter, is it that different than how capitalism treats workers today? People like Elon Musk, they don't see their workers as people. They see them as fuel in the machine to get them the product they want to consume. That is, money. I think this book is a really good job of analyzing how we can slowly devolve our integrity and our morals to justify certain things. And I think they're things that do actually happen already in the capitalist system, if not in the most direct and vulgar way that we see executed in this book. And that's as far as I'm going to take it for now, because I don't want to spoil it more than I already have. But I do want a full discussion video of this book, and just like The Devourers, where I get into the full details, because this book was fucking phenomenal, and I think it had a lot to say in a very brutal way. It's one of those books that, unlike Hellraiser, it wasn't brutal for brutal's sake. It was brutal because it has something it needed to communicate to us. And that is, I think, some of the best horror that exists, to be quite frank with you. And finally, my best fiction book of the year was, in fact, a short fiction collection, and that is Exhalation by Ted Chiang. I knew this was one of those books I had expectations for, and it definitely met them. Ted Chiang, I need to read this other short story collection, but what can I say? This is a collection of sci-fi and with a little bit of fantasy, and each story ends with a conversation by the author explaining their thought processes of why they chose to explore the story in this manner. And as a scientist, and as someone who just loves sci-fi fantasy intersection, I felt like this book was made for me. Every story was just so well constructed, just so amazing. And when we got that insight of his perspective of each story, of how he sort of crafted it, I think it just continued that sort of feeding of my science side, of my scientist side, of helping me appreciate the creativity that stems from the science, right? We start with the science and it makes the mind begin to roll. That's what I love about cosmology, about nature of reality. That's why I love science so much. And this book is the perfect example of how science can inspire us to think about just really compelling stories. And that's why it's easy to say that this book is my number one for the year. It isn't horror as much as I do love horror. It hits different. And I have to say that, well, no, I can't say that. There was one book you're going to pick up. I can't say it's just this one. It's all of them, okay? Let's not play this game. Just read them all, and I won't be mad. If you don't read every single one, I might be mad, and I can't promise I won't unfriend you. I'm kidding. Thanks so much for watching. This is it. This is all the books I've read this year. No, it's not. God damn it. This is all the top fiction books for my list, best of 2022. What is wrong with me? Thank you so much for watching. Clearly, I'm getting film fatigue. So I appreciate you sticking around, because clearly, I think I've had enough of this for now. I hope you have a great day. Stay safe, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.